A lovely morning to our participants and welcome to the sixth session of the Environmental Law Online Teachers Training Program. This training program is developed by the Legal Education Board in partnership with Asian Development Bank, the International Union for Conservation of Nature Academy of Environmental Law, and the UN Environment Program. We invite everyone to join. We also would like to remind and invite everyone to join the Facebook page Envi Asia Law, and the link for the Facebook page is now posted in our chat box. We also encourage our participants to join us for an interview. So the interview form is also posted in our chat box, and we will just schedule an interview session with you. I am Attorney Maria Romina Gumal, Program Coordinator of the Legal Education Board, and I will be your host for today. For today's session, the topic is Pedagogical Enrichment on Environmental Law. Before we get started, for a brief recap of our last session, we discussed the topic on syllabus review workshop with our resource speaker, Professor Jonathan Laljublat. We had a very engaging workshop last week where participants are divided into groups and discussed the essential elements of the syllabus, its content, and pedagogy. They were able also to practice identifying and incorporating essential elements in the existing syllabi. Now, let me introduce to you our resource speaker for today. Our resource speaker for today is Dr. Georgina Lloyd. She is the Regional Coordinator of the Asia and the Pacific of Environmental Law and Governance for the United Nations Environment Program. She joined the UNEP regional office after spending 12 years based in Siem Reap, Cambodia. And during her time in Southeast Asia, she was able to conduct research on environmental law and policy, heritage law, heritage and tourism management, and the development of good environmental governance. Georgina has been involved in capacity building for the environmental law within Southeast Asia and has provided advice for government and non-government stakeholders on environmental law and policies issues. So to our participants, we would like to remind you of our house rules to mute your microphone when you are not speaking and during the lecture session of our resource speaker for today. And we kindly encourage you to use our chat box option and the reaction button at the lower portion of your screen. And to lessen the bandwidth, we also would like to request everyone to turn off their video camera, and we will just inform you when we'll be taking our photo session. So let us all welcome our resource speaker for today, Dr. Georgina Lloyd.
Thank you very much, Mary, for the introduction, and good morning to everyone. So this morning, I'm going to be speaking about a topic that I'm very passionate about, which is experiential learning in environmental law. And I'm going to draw upon particularly some examples that from the time where I was teaching environmental law and governance in Cambodia, because there are a number of conservation issues and legal issues that are similar to those that exist in the Philippines. But I mean, I was first exposed to experiential learning in environmental law when I was doing my master's in environmental law through the University of Sydney. And this involved, I took a number of intensive units, and several of these actually involved field trips. Where we would go into different communities and visit different sites and sort of really explore the facts of a case and understand how the legal issues that we would identify in the classroom would apply in the real world. And I have to say that was really what pushed me to do environmental law, just understanding the impact that the work and the research and the learning that we do in the classroom can have in the real world. So I'm going to speak this morning on this idea of experiential learning and how it can be integrated into environmental law curriculums. So it's this process of engaged learning whereby students learn by doing, and they not only learn by doing, but then learning from their reflections on participating in that experience. Experiential learning activities can include hands-on experiments, internships, practicums, field exercises, study abroad, and undergrad or postgrad research. It often, in order for it to be really effective, it needs to be well planned. needs to be closely supervised. And it also, you need to devise a way to assess the student learning outcomes through these programs. But they can really stimulate students through academic inquiry and promoting interdisciplinary learning, which is so fundamental in environmental law, because you need to understand the foundations of environmental science in order to really understand the facts of certain cases. It also promotes civic engagement, opens opportunities for career development, builds cultural awareness, leadership skills, and lots of other sort of practical, professional, and intellectual skills. So there are huge benefits to trying to build in experiential learning. I mean, the challenges of it is that often it's expensive because taking students into the field is costly. And it does take a lot of time from the professors. Often, in order for it to be really effective, you need to be working closely with relevant stakeholders, and ideally working with a range of stakeholders. So if you're taking them to a protected area, you would want to expose students to interviews with the protected area authorities, interviews with the affected communities, interviews possibly even with a business interest, and maybe with local government, and so that they see all of the different elements and the different perspectives that pertain to a particular case. And that, of course, involves a lot of time and communication and coordination with all of those different parties. It also involves a lot of trust building, because in order to go into those communities and get them to share and also have dialogue with government, you need to know that students are doing this for a learning experience. They're not going to be writing critiques that will be published on the front page of tomorrow's newspaper, that they're going to be using this as an academic exercise and nothing else. And so similarly, you need to tell your students that as well. I mean, you don't want your students to be suddenly writing a blog revealing all of this information that would affect those relationships. I mean, I think one of the most successful field trips that I take my students on was actually to a huge hydropower dam site in Cambodia that was incredibly sensitive, because it was actually run through a BOT agreement, a build, operate, transfer agreement, which is a popular method of large infrastructure development in Southeast Asia, run by a Chinese company, in fact, China Power, with the close collaboration of the Cambodian Ministry of Mines, Energy, and overseeing dams. And we had to go all the way to the top of the ministry to get permission. And then we had to build the trust with China Power, which was very difficult, but actually it became one of the most successful sites. And the issue is that site is completely excluded to all local communities. And so they no longer have access to a lot of their natural resources that they had access to prior to the dam construction. There's also lots of downstream impacts, lots of other things. So, but we built these relationships, and we're actually able, sometimes not as successfully, to interview the people in China Power, as well as interviewing the downstream communities. So these really do have opportunities to have massive impacts on your students, and they get a lot from these experiences. So just going through some different opportunities. I mean, the first one is undergrad research experience or postgrad research experience, as in Philippines, the legal degree is a postgrad degree. So students basically, in this case, are functioning as research assistants and collaborators on faculty projects. And this image on the left here that you see is actually an example of that. I had two, in my case, they were undergrad research students, because law is undergrad, and they were actually carrying out a research project that we were doing on the Tonle Sap Lake in Cambodia to explore the how climate change regulations and laws are actually being implemented through provincial planning and district planning. So we were actually in the field, and the person that they're with is a Ministry of Environment official. So again, building that really close relationships, and he actually came into the field and really got into the research with us. And that is a critical thing as well, because if you build those relationships, you have those, you get the government colleagues and counterparts in the field with you, they really get to understand these issues and the impacts as well. So we had the Ministry of Environment with us in the field and our students. And of course, the outcome was that we found that despite the inclusion within Cambodian laws of a number of different factors of community impacts, particularly migration impacts of climate change, it wasn't being reflected in commune planning, district planning. But this was a really good example. The next example is community-based research, which can be very similar to undergrad research, depending on the form of undergrad research. But community research is where you cooperate with local organizations to conduct studies to meet the needs of a particular community. And students can gain also that direct experience in the research process. The next example are field trips and field work. And this is something that you can definitely incorporate into a semester-long course. So supervised student practice carried out away from the university in contact with people, natural phenomena, and other entities that are being studied. So it's especially useful in environmental studies and in earth studies, and giving students that exposure to the actual science that is relevant to environmental law. So I've used these methods quite extensively in my teaching, particularly the number of years that I was teaching environmental law and governance in Cambodia, which did involve international students coming to Cambodia to travel, to study, as well as some Cambodian students I taught at the Panyasa University in Cambodia as well. And so there is also study abroad, and that study abroad is a form of experiential learning. There are opportunities for our environmental law students to do international placements and international positions. There is a good example in Malaysia, actually, in Sabah, where they run a set of, what do they call it? I think they call them environmental law summer placements or something, where you work with an NGO in Sabah learning about environmental issues and legal issues in Malaysia. The next example of experiential learning is one that you can actually do in the classroom, which is student teaching or flipped classrooms. And this, of course, is where you put the students in the role of being a teacher. I'm sure you probably explored this already in the course of this series. And they basically are given the role of providing certain information to the rest of the class. Then you have things that maybe you don't have as much direct control over, such as internships. But you can work closely with local NGOs and other organizations to build an internship program. And one of the most successful that I have heard of is the University of Hawaii has an internship program with local government agencies, where actually they place their third-year law students into, say, the Department of Conservation or the Attorney's Office or whatever it may be. And students actually gain experience with those government counterparts. And apparently the government has said that it's so valuable for them to have these student interns that they themselves have started funding the internship program. So that's a good thing to explore. The last one is clinics, legal clinics. And clinical education is important not just for the students, but also for communities, and in promoting access to justice, access to information amongst communities. I know that there are a number of organizations, and I know Rizalisa is very interested in this, in sort of establishing environmental legal clinics within universities in the Philippines. And UNEP recognizes that law clinics provide a really valuable contribution to environmental rule of law, particularly, as I said, supporting Rio Principle 10 rights, or access to information, access to justice rights. They support legal research. students can support the development of legal handbooks and supporting also policy development. Legal clinics can also provide commentary on broader legal issues in a country or region and raise the profile of emerging priority legal issues. There are not many environmental law clinics in Asia Pacific, and UNEP is seeking to work with academic institutions to see how we can further establish these environmental law clinics. So we did work with university in Wuhan in China to establish one of the first environmental law clinics in China. And that was in 2018 that the Wuhan Environmental Law Clinic was established. We're now working very closely with Chiang Mai University in Philippines, and we hope to establish an environmental law clinic in Chiang Mai as well. Just one other example that may be relevant to the Philippines is cooperative education. And this is where you actually have elements of your course that work with the private sector. And so students actually spend some time in the classroom and then some time in a company or an organization, and they get work experience at that organization, and that work experience counts towards their units, their completion of the course. So let's discuss, I mean, I would love to discuss how all of those sorts of things have been incorporated into your teaching when we get to the discussion session, but I'm just going to provide a couple of examples of how I've done this. So this is a field trip and we were studying protected areas management. And so this one actually was literally, I took the students to the field and I just gave my lecture that I could easily have given in the classroom. I actually just gave the lecture on the ground, sitting next to the forest. And just having students in place, I think made a difference. You know, we could literally talk about an element and point to it. And then they could get up and do a walk around and ask questions. And they also have, as I said before, reflection on these exercises is part of that learning process. So they have reflective journals. And every time we do a field trip, they have to fill out a little journal entry, which is very short, but they have to say, you know, what they did, where they were, what, you know, take notes of the trip. And then they have to write like 3 takeaways that they grasped from that trip. Another example is taking them into the field to look at illegal logging and extraction of natural resources. This was actually at a ranger station, this particular image, and these are all behind you, or behind me in the picture rather, is all of the logs and the vehicles and the equipment that have been confiscated by illegal loggers. And so this site is normally closed, obviously, but because of our relationship with the rangers, with the Ministry of Environment and with the Wildlife Conservation Society that was working at this site, they took us on a tour of this, the confiscation yard, and we got to explore, you know, students could actually see the wood and understand the rosewood, the mahogany, you know, these are the critical species that are being logged, and this is why they're being logged. And these are also the techniques that loggers are using. These are sorts of the regulations. And then you can start discussing penalties. How do you assess the damage caused to the ecosystem because of this illegal activity? This is an example of community-based research studying community participation in natural resource management, community protected areas and land tenure. So this was up in Phnom Kulen National Park, where there are a series of communities that actually live within the national park. And they actually have 5 community protected areas established within that site. And students could seek to understand some of the major challenges, governance challenges that communities face in trying to monitor and patrol their protected areas. This is another example out on the lake. So this is another student of mine that was doing research on climate change impacts on communities and the implementation of climate regulations at the local level and sort of the lack of implementation and the consequences for communities. And then this is an example of a field exercise looking at municipal solid waste management and pollution laws. So this is a site that is an open dumping site outside of Siem Reap in Cambodia. And there were, up until very recently, a number of waste picking families that actually lived on the site with their children and extended families. And obviously this was caused, because it was an open dumping site, there were a lot of environmental impacts, but there were also a lot of social impacts that needed to be considered: exposure to hazardous substances and the potential for social and community impacts as well. So I wanted to actually delve into this one a little bit more and show how I sort of developed these field exercises and tutorials. And I'm going to give 2 examples of tutorials around solid waste management and pollution, because you can do this. You don't have to actually do field trips in the field. You can do virtual field trips as well, which is what we all have to resort to in this time of COVID. Of course, there is a strong impact of actually physically being there, seeing the issues, but you can sort of have other ways of demonstrating. So let me move to my other documents. Okay, you should still be able to see this. Just confirm that you can put back up. Can you see that?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, I'm trying to make it so that no, that doesn't help. Sorry, just changing the viewing thing to try and make it easier for you to see it. Okay, I think this is the best one. Okay, so in this one, this was looking at solid waste management. And this is a real example, but obviously when you do tutorials in the classroom, you can just sort of take a real example, change all of the names and you make it a fictional example based on certain facts that are relevant. So, providing students with the context of the situation and then using images to explain it to them. As I said, in this case, it was a public-private partnership. It was between the Siem Reap provincial government and a private company called Gaia. They had this open waste, open dump that was basically just clay holes in the ground, that some of which were overflowing. There was effluent that was flowing into neighboring rice fields, which were being used for agriculture. And there were birds and animals encroaching on the site, as well as a local community of waste pickers who relied on the site for scavenging of waste. And they took not only plastics and other materials, but they also took organic waste from the site to sell as pig feed. So there were concerns around children on the site and also local residents complaining about the pumping, because they not only was there just runoff, they were actually pumping the leachate from the waste site into the fields. And in some cases, actually, the farmers were not complaining because it was sort of somewhat organic fertilizer. But in amongst that organic fertilizer, a lot of heavy metals and other contaminants that would be very dangerous. So yeah, these are all the facts that, expressed with all of the images. I won't go through it in detail, but then just posing the questions. So ideally, you would couple this with an actual site visit. Students fill out their reflective journals, interview the waste pickers, go to Gaia, interview Gaia, get all of these different perspectives, and then they have to understand who is legally responsible for environmental harm from this waste site. what is the legislation that would administer this through the Ministry of Environment? Who is responsible for measuring water quality, leachate, the soil pollution surrounding the site? What administrative sanctions are available? What other administrative mechanisms could be used by MOE? And what should be taken in respect to the demands and the actions of the waste scavengers and the local community? What rights and obligations do they have? And students can then explore this from a legal perspective, and then you can have a really interesting debate around ethics and morals and responsibility as well, which is all part of good environmental governance. So that is one example. And the second example, also I should mention that this example, I use this in my teaching, but this particular one that I'm showing you is also from a TTT iteration of it that we did for the TTT program that was held in Cambodia with ADB and IUCN. So the next example is one that I developed in conjunction with USAID, and this one was actually for the Thai Judicial Training Institute, but it's very similar. You know, it's a tutorial on pollution. And this is an example where you can also do a virtual field trip, but you could couple it with an in the field trip as well. So this is also understanding the effects of contamination and laws to mitigate pollution. In this particular scenario, it's pollution and contamination of a site that has been developed for a community, and owners of the land then find out that there had been formerly an owner who had buried chemicals under the soil. So you could do a role play with this one and have the different groups form different positions. I won't go through it, but it's, you know, this is all of the opportunities for the role play. You can have the residents of the community, the housing, the pollution control agency, Consumer Protection Board, and the original landowners. Again, asking students to identify the legislation that's applicable to the case, what facts need to be established, what administrative and legal actions can be taken, what is the defense, and what is the remedy that's available. If you can actually couple this with a field trip, students could have interviews and draw upon those interviews for their own positions within the debate. So it just says here that if an in-person activity, you can arrange for a site inspection and a real case location to be part of their prep activity. And I've actually done something very similar to this. I've taken my students to north on the Mekong River, where there's a population of critically endangered Irrawaddy dolphins, which are the dolphins that exist only on a small number of rivers and coastal areas in Southeast Asia. But this population is critically endangered. And they actually go and they interview boat owners who depend on tourism to see the dolphins. And then they interview WWF. They interview the local rangers from the Fisheries Administration. And then they actually do a debate about whether or not the Irrawaddy dolphin tourism should be prohibited. Because they're also given background papers that are showing that the boat tourism is impacting the social behavior of the dolphins and all those sorts of things. So there's just so much opportunity to explore these critical issues in environmental law and get students to sort of synthesize how the law is applicable in the real world. So I'm going to stop here maybe for a little bit of discussion, and then we're going to move to the second part of my presentation, what I'm going to share today, which is on another tool for online learning of environmental law, which is Informea. So maybe if there are any questions.
All right, to our participants, if you have any questions or would like to share any of your comments, you can raise your hand or message us in the chat box. I think we have with us today Dean Pichi Alfelor Moraleda. Dean, would you like to speak and share if you have any questions or comments on the lecture?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Actually, I've been lucky that this is the third TPT training that I have attended. The first two ones were in Cebu. So really we in those trainings we were also able to do some experiential learning. We were able to do some field trip to the um, uh, dump site in Cebu, and also to the environmentalist to a house of an environmentalist who was doing some activities in solar energy and also um, recycling. I think my question actually is because in our university, in our law school, most of our students are working. So one of the big problems, even pre-pandemic, was really trying to. What I mean is they are part-time students. So it's really finding time for everybody to be together for a field trip. So I was wondering if now during the virtual, when we have virtual learning methodologies, is it uh, possible to do experiential learning remotely, like considering that some of our students would need to cross provincial borders, so it would also be difficult for them to gather together more this time. So is it possible that it could be done remotely by maybe having like live broadcast of, for example, um, the materials recovery unit of a local government unit in the Philippines. Thank you.
Yeah, shall I respond to that, or are there any other comments? Okay, I'll respond to that first. So yeah, I completely understand. It's very difficult once students are postgraduate students, they're working part-time, even undergraduate, they're often working at the same time. So there are a couple of strategies. I guess one is that you sort of have one field trip maybe within the semester, and that is sort of a weekend field trip where 2 days or something students can come together and set that time aside. I know even that can be difficult, but the other ways are providing these opportunities for sort of internships, and their experiential learning doesn't, I mean, all of my examples were in the field, but it doesn't have to just be in the field. You know, they can provide support to a community NGO from home. They can speak to local community over the phone. They can explore the issues, and they, you know, I did an internship when I finished my master's, or no, was it undergrad? I can't remember. It was a long time ago. I did an internship with the Environmental Defenders Office in Australia. And that was a work-based, research-based internship, but it was still communicating with a lot of the stakeholders in the communities. So there are ways to maybe devise field trips virtually, or devise sort of scenarios that don't necessarily require the students to all come together and travel to a place. Although I would really argue for, if possible, take them into the field, because that's not only where the reality of a situation comes to students, but it's also where they get passion for the issues, and really for city students who haven't experienced the plights of local communities in accessing their natural resources in a protected area, for example, it really sort of is that light bulb moment where they understand the consequences of some of these policy decisions and legal instruments. So I would say just trying to sort of carve out a little bit of time in the semester, if possible.
Okay, so we have another question. So we have a question from Judge Kashmir Cruz.
Yes, I see the question about student waivers. Yes, health and safety is critical. And so for me, I had to do a wilderness first aid certificate in order to take the students into the field. So you should always have at least one person, obviously a faculty member, or you bring with you an additional resource person who is first aid trained. The other thing is waivers. Yes, for all of your students, they'll be over 18, I would imagine. So you would get them as individuals to sign waivers to say that they understand that there are risks involved and everything that is in compliance with your university protocols. That is very important. But also what we had to do whenever we did a field trip is we had to do a risk management plan. And you know, this stuff does take time. And again, it's part of teachers having to plan everything carefully. But we had to put like the itinerary, all the phone numbers, the vehicles we were using, had the vehicles been insured, were there seatbelts in the vehicles that we were using? We also had to figure out how far to the nearest primary care, how far to the sort of the closest intensive care. Where was there a helipad evacuation site too close to it? You know, all of this detail we had to put in, including the numbers of if we need to evacuate a student by helicopter, what are the phone numbers that we needed to call? And part of that is also collecting, do students have insurance? Do they not have, you know, personal medical insurance? And encouraging students that they should have personal medical insurance to cover any costs that may arise if they are injured. So health and safety is really paramount.
We have also Matthew raising his hand. I think Matthew would like to
Yes, thanks, Mary, and thanks, Georgie. And I wonder if this is also something, you know, in terms of insurance and risk waivers and so forth, whether that's something that universities can come together to look at insurance. I mean, insurance is obviously very required for many countries when going, but it's not always the case in our university in the region. And so I think that's also something like group insurance, just in case things go wrong, because that's always, you know, potentially, and that's potentially something that a group of universities could do to cover, you know, all their students engaged in the activities, so that it doesn't just put the burden onto the student or the stress onto the teacher as well.
Yeah, I agree. And also similarly for the staff, we did that for our local Cambodian staff that came into the field with us. We had a group medical insurance policy that covered emergency medical insurance. So any, like if they were bitten by a snake, for example, I learned you need a specific clause for snake bites. It's not included standard. But, you know, having that coverage for your staff that are in the field, as well as, if possible, having a group. Emergency evacuation insurance is something that can often be gotten independently of others. So you could have just emergency evacuation insurance for all of the students.
Okay, we also
I see there's another comment about the need to coordinate closely with police and army and local authorities because of insurgency issues. Yes, that is something that I have not had to deal with in Cambodia. Cambodia has a myriad of challenges, but insurgency issues are not one of them. So obviously that's part of your risk management planning, is doing an assessment of where it is safe to take students and where the risks might outweigh the benefits. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in the depths of a protected area. I know a lot of the most critical environmental law challenges are where there are active contests between local landowners, Indigenous peoples, and often developers. But my students have also gained a lot from going to a wildlife breeding facility and talking about the trade in endangered species, and you could still talk about illegal hunting and those sorts of things in a wildlife breeding facility. So there, I guess it's all about that planning and assessing risks. And if you do have those close relationships with local authorities, it is very important to also get the relevant permissions that you need. If there are no other comments or questions at this point, maybe we move on to the next part, which is, oh, Mary, did you want to come in? Sorry.
No, it's okay. I was just announcing that if any of our participants would like to ask questions, or if you have any additional comments, you can just message us in the chat box, and we can discuss it later in the lecture of Dr. Georgina. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just sharing a link with everyone. So the next part of the session is going to explore the use of an online tool that can be used within the teaching to explore particularly the linkages between international environmental law and domestic or national implementation of international legal obligations. And this is something that is run by UNEP together with other multilateral environmental agreement secretariats. And the website is called Informea. So I shared the link in the box, in the chat box for everyone. This is UNEP's primary database for information on multilateral environmental agreements. There are a number of other discrete websites that we have for other stakeholders. We also have the LEAP platform, which is the Law and Environment Assistance Platform, which is targeted toward member states. So member states can ask UNEP directly for technical legal assistance through LEAP and access information. Then we also have the Global Judicial Portal, which is an amazing database for judges. But Informea is the most useful in terms of teaching environmental law. On this website, that you can browse information by environmental topic. But I think what is most relevant in this example is that you can look at a specifically state's party to an MEA and look at how they have implemented their MEA obligations. So if we go to browse a party and we go down to the Philippines, we can see the party information, which includes party status. Yeah, try and make this a bit bigger. So this includes a list of the MEAs that Philippines is a signatory to, and what is their status, whether it's been ratified or they're just a party to it, or they acceded to the convention. So you can see all of that information in one place. You can then also see how the Philippines is implementing their obligations through action plans. So for example, under the CBD, you can see the NBSAPs, the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plans that have been submitted by the Philippines. You can also see what reporting has been done by the Philippines. So again, if we look under the CBD, you can see all of their national reports. And as you know, under international obligations and the MEAs, countries are required to report to the Secretariat on their implementation in a periodic basis. So you could see the files that have been submitted. Philippines has not yet submitted its, or hasn't recorded its latest submission in 2019 for the CBD. But you can see this under all of them, under CITES, under CMS, etc. So students can use this to understand the current status of an MEA implementation. If, for example, they're looking at encroachment on a listed wetland site under Ramsar Convention, they can look and see through a summary of a national report with the latest submitted this year in March, how the Philippines is implementing Ramsar. So it can be a good first way for students to see what is the national legislation, who is the designated authority, what are all of the Ramsar sites within the Philippines, what are key management issues that have been identified for those sites, and etc. You can also have a database here of national legislation. This may not be 100% complete, but we do have interoperability with other key environmental law data sets such as Ecolex, Fowlex, and others. But it is fairly comprehensive. You can see there are 400 pieces of national legislation for the Philippines. You can then filter your search. You can look at just regulations. You can look under certain glossaries. So if you wanted to look at, for example, logging, you can click either under the legislation or you can filter the glossary on the side. If we just want to look at logging, it will pull up all of the relevant legislation that is being tagged to logging in the Philippines. And one thing I wanted to say here is that we are always seeking to improve the data set, and students are a great counterpart for that. So if your students are undertaking research and identify an updated regulation or an amended piece of legislation that is not yet on the database, then you can submit it to us and we will make sure that it is updated. Similarly for court decisions is probably where we need the most assistance to build up, but you can see there are only 15 landmark cases that have been loaded onto the database here, but it does have the major landmark cases. It has resident mammals. You'll see Oposa v. Vactoran somewhere down here. It does have a lot of landmark cases, but again, this could be supplemented with additional cases. You can search cases, for example, for a particular topic like polluter pays, and it will filter the cases that are relevant to polluter pays to this. So you can also look at access to justice, public participation, precautionary principle, those sorts of things to find out cases. So it's an easy way for students to actually find case law that they need to argue a certain point. Also, you can search this globally. So you could go to the law and cases, search the precautionary principle, and find a whole lot of global cases so they can do comparative analysis. You can then filter that so you only want cases from Asia and the Pacific. You can do that. The other thing that's really useful here is the contacts hub. This lists all of the authorities that are responsible as a focal point for implementation of these relevant multilateral environmental agreements within Philippines. So again, if your student is doing research and wants to reach out to the government counterpart to understand, for example, why Philippines has not submitted their latest country status report under the Basel Convention, they could find out who the focal point is and reach out and discuss with them if they would like to. So this is a really useful site and resource. There's lots of other information here. If they want to just learn about the different treaties, they can go on here and they can learn about all of the relevant treaties that link to biodiversity. They may not even be, like there may be some regional treaties that are not applicable to Southeast Asia, but it could also be good for students to understand that there are also a number of regional MEAs that look at certain topics. The other thing that I wanted to share with you is the e-learning component of Infomea. And we have had universities actually incorporate this into their teaching. So you can, for example, get students to do, if we go down to governance, because that's the most relevant for us, you can get students to do the introductory course to international environmental law as part of your teaching. And at the end of the course, there is a quiz. In order to pass, they need at least 80%, and it will automatically generate a certificate. So you can get your students to submit that certificate as proof that they took the course and passed it with more than 80%. And it can be sort of a foundational, instead of even maybe sort of getting them to read a standard textbook, you can get them to go and do this interactive course on international environmental law. There are also many others, such as Introduction to Human Rights and the Environment, Effective Compliance of MEAs, a huge range of courses. And this is the course, this one here, Introductory Course on International and National Environmental Law and Governance in Thailand, that we worked on with the Thai Judicial Training Institute on the development of that course. So yeah, a lot of fantastic resources that are available through this. Before I move to how I have used Infomea as examples within teaching, can I ask Angelo to please play the video?
Hold on.
Is it Angelo who's going to do that?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
A flock of birds like this is one of nature's wonders, a symbol of the interconnectedness of our world, constantly under pressure from climate change, toxins, development, destruction of habitat, and 100 other threats. Over the last 50 years, the world has come together to secure protection for our planet and the millions of species it supports, including our own. The international community has agreed legally binding treaties and instruments which allow countries to commit to preserving the planet for future generations. The treaties and agreements themselves are an integrated web of environmental law. And in order to ensure that stakeholders had the best access to the available information, an intelligent tool was required. This groundbreaking resource is called Infomea, and it's the online home of the world's multilateral environmental agreements, or MEAs. Infomea provides a bird's-eye view of all major environmental treaties across key topics and how they relate to every country and region in the world. The keyword search tool allows for rapid retrieval of information and through intelligent cross-referencing delivers a powerful research capability. Environmental decision makers can use this unrivaled database to explore best practice and design their country's policies in line with global environmental legislation. MEAs have different objectives and scope, but their effects are often overlapping and sometimes interdependent. All UN member countries have signed up to one or more MEAs. The direction of travel is for more and more countries to ratify and implement more and more agreements. The glossary section is where topics can be searched to provide an explanatory definition and links to all of the relevant treaty articles and documents. The e-learning platform is a key benefit of the portal. It provides free, self-paced introductory courses on each MEA. At the end of each course, a certificate of completion can be obtained. Everyone involved in the environment community, from governments, international organizations, civil society and the private sector, can benefit from accessing the Infomea portal. It organizes the world's environmental law for those who need it, and it helps the world steer and implement global environmental policy. Infomea supports a path to a safer, more sustainable future. Spread the word.
Great, thank you, Angelo. So that sort of summarizes much more succinctly what I was demonstrating on the platform. But what I want to talk about in the last sort of 5 or so minutes that I've got before I hand over is how I've actually integrated Infomea into teaching. So I'm going to once more share my screen to provide some sort of examples. So all of the examples that I've taken actually are tutorials that we developed as part of that course that we worked on for the Thai Judicial Training Institute. But you can take these examples and you can, amend them and formulate them for others. So I'll take the first one, which was a tutorial that we did for lesson 1, which was really just exploring contemporary environmental legal issues. It was an introduction to environmental law for the students. And so basically what we did is we sort of said to them, you have framework environmental laws and you often have sectoral laws. And these are different categories that often have sectoral laws and regulations that apply to them. So what students had to do is they had to pick a sector and they just had to understand the scope of that area of environmental law. They needed to identify 2 national laws that are relevant, say to biodiversity, and then they had to look at those laws and say what are their offenses within the laws, are there penalties that relate to an offense or a violation under that law. They also needed to identify which institutions were responsible for the implementation, enforcement, and compliance of that law under that area of environmental law. So you can, these are just all categories that we used: air pollution, noise pollution, EIA, etc. So you can tell them that they should go and use Infomea and perhaps any other additional domestic resources and repositories of information that you have in the Philippines. Another example is in tutorial for lesson 4, which was looking at the principles of environmental law. And obviously in the lecture, we went through core legal principles. These are just 14 here, not excluded, not all of the principles. Obviously, there are some key ones missing here, such as principle of non-regression, and a few others. But these are the principles that we introduced. And then we said you could do this either as a flipped classroom, or you could do this as a research activity. And what they had to do is they had to go and read the Rio and the Stockholm declarations. They had to identify core principles of environmental law that are reflected in those declarations. And then this is the Thailand example, but they had to look at how those principles have actually been incorporated into jurisprudence at the national level. So again, we said to them that they should go and use Infomea or Ecolex, but actually, as I said, these data sets have interoperability. So what you find on Infomea would be on Ecolex. And they could use the Global Judicial Portal if they wanted to as well. And using these databases, identify landmark cases from the Philippines, in your case, that would indicate how those legal principles have been incorporated into judgments. You could also get them to do a comparative where they have to find, say for polluter pays principle, they have to find 2 landmark cases in the Philippines and 2 landmark cases from another jurisdiction, either within Southeast Asia or globally. And they could identify that through Infomea as well. And then they had to present their findings back to the class. So that's another example. And then the third one is where it was an actual class on MEAs. So again, we sort of said the 6 different categories of MEAs. Then we had a list of which MEAs Thailand was a signatory to. And in this activity, students were given an MEA. And what they had to do is they had to fill out a information fact sheet on their relevant MEA that they had been given. They had to find out who the secretariat was, when it was opened for signatory, when it was adopted, when it entered into force, how many currently, as of whatever date they put, how many parties there are, When the conference of the parties is held, how frequently is the conference of the party held? What has been the most recent COP for that MEA? One of the things that I find for my students when they first come into environmental law is that everyone's heard about the COPs under the UNFCCC, but they often don't realize that every MEA has its own COP or its conference of the parties or conference of the members, and that these happen at different frequencies. I mean, obviously the COP under the UNFCCC is annual, but not all other MEAs have COPs that are conducted annually. Are there any nested protocols and agreements under that convention? For example, the Paris Agreement under UNFCCC, or there are other MEAs that have nested protocols. Is Philippines a signatory? As of what date? Did Philippines ratify or accede? As of what date? And if there are details of that, so is there a piece of an act at the national level that is an act of signature or an act of ratification? And then is there further implementing legislation? Who is the designated authority at the national level for implementation of that legislation? And any other information. So here I would say to them, what is the scope of the convention? Are there expert bodies under the convention? So if we look at the World Heritage Convention, for example, you have the role of a number like IUCN for natural sites. IUCN functions as an expert body under the convention that has a critical role to play. And then you can talk about like what environmental justice principles are incorporated in that convention. And they might have to identify those, or there's lots of other information that they might want to present. So this is a good exercise as well to just get students to understand how MEAs function and how they translate, how the obligations translate to the domestic level. Or you could look at it from the reverse, why there are certain provisions within national legislation and what has been the origin or the influence of those certain provisions that have come from the global level. So those are just 3 examples of how I have specifically incorporated the use of Infomea into the teaching of environmental law. So I'll stop here again for any further questions.
All right. To our participants, if you have any questions, you can just click the raise hand button, or you can just send your question or comments in the chat box. Commissioner Jojo commented that your lecture is very rich. So any of our participants, do you have any questions?
And I should also say that such is the breadth and depth of what is available on Infomea. And I know Georgie has done a very quick dive through, but if any of the participants want us to sort of spend or take some time or organize a further sort of evaluation or review, in particular, once you register to access the e-learning portal, we could go through particular topics to get some familiarity, but it's such a huge wealth of knowledge and certainly updated materials on everything related to multilateral environmental agreements. But also, as Georgie says, it goes beyond that in terms of things like governance issues, environment and human rights courses. And so there's a lot of material and courses that we could look at and use in our own teaching. So if that's something also that people are interested in, it's something that we could consider doing, looking more in depth at the e-learning course, because there is a lot of material. And Georgie, I think, is just very familiar with the material and expertise in using it. So it makes it look all easy.
Yes, the Infomea website is very comprehensive. I think both students and professor can really make use of the data there, since it's considered like a one-stop shop for all data related to international agreements, jurisprudence, cases. So I guess our participants would like the idea that we can have another discussion, a more detailed discussion on the Informaya website and how it can be used as an online tool. So I guess we don't have any questions or any comments from our participants. We would now move on to the awarding of the certificates. So the Legal Education Board presents the Certificate of Appreciation to Dr. Georgina Lloyd, UN Environment Program Regional Coordinator of the Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific, for sharing her time, knowledge, and expertise as resource speakers during the Environmental Law Teachers Online Training Program 6th session with the topic Pedagogical Enrichment on Environmental Law, held via Zoom virtual conference and given this third day of November in the year of our Lord 2021, signed by our chairperson of the Legal Education Board, Ana Marie Melanie B. Trinidad. Thank you, Dr. Georgina Lloyd, for your lecture.
Thank you very much, Mary. I'm very happy to join. And, this is so important. You can tell I'm quite passionate about this topic, and I love teaching environmental law. So I'm very happy to participate.
Thank you. So I guess Jojo commented also that maybe we can have that discussion on Informaya maybe by next year. We'll have another training for that, but let's see to it that we'll make sure that will happen. So before we move on to the second part of today's session, we would like to announce that the 11th session of the training program scheduled on December 8, 2021 is a non-mandatory session since it is a declared holiday. Hence, we will only require attendance to at least 8 sessions for the issuance of the certificate. Nonetheless, we would like to invite everyone to attend the December 8th session since we will be having, I guess we have around 4 resource speakers for that session, and we will be having our closing remarks for the ending of the training session. So we will now move on to our 5-minute break. So to our participants, we would like to remind you to be back at 10:11. So you may now have your wellness break. All right, so I guess everyone is back in the room. We will now move on to the second part of our session for today. So we will be having a dialogue with our resource speakers on 3 identified topics. So let me introduce to you our resource speakers. Gladys, would you like to play the PowerPoint presentation? Okay, so for our resource speakers for the second part of our session, we have Attorney Rose Lisa Osorio, Chair of the Governing Board of the IUCN Academy of Environmental Law. She is a member of the Steering Committee of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law and specializes in environmental law policy and governance as well as coastal and fisheries management. She's a law professor from the University of Cebu and mentors young lawyers and law students in environmental law litigation. We also have for our second resource speaker, Attorney Ernesto B. Neri, who is the Director of Center for Legal Assistance in Xavier University, Ateneo de Cagayan College of Law. He is a data privacy officer in the said university under the Office of the University President and an environmental law professor. He practices litigation and he is a partner of Neri and Neri Law Office in Cagayan de Oro City. We also have with us today to share his experiences as a law student, the national president of the ALSP, Kenny J. Bayuden. He is a licensed professional teacher and a data privacy specialist. He obtained his Bachelor of Secondary Education in Xavier University Ateneo de Cagayan with specialization in mathematics and obtained his Doctor of Education in University of Makati. He is now currently taking up law in Arellano University School of Law. Let us all welcome our 3 resource speaker for the second part of today's lecture. So let's start with Attorney Rose Lisa Osorio.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be back, and I would be sharing with you about the mooting exercise as a form of participatory and experiential learning activity that we can hold as environmental law professors. And so for mooting, it's actually a simulation of a court hearing in which participants analyze a problem, research the relevant law, prepare written submissions, and present their oral arguments. So what are the benefits? So the benefits of mooting is that it will offer students not only an opportunity to improve their persuasive advocacy skills, but it will also enable them to apply the knowledge they obtain in class on complex and cutting-edge questions of international and domestic law cases. So as mentioned earlier by Dr. Georgina Lloyd, to have these experiential learning activities requires a good amount of preparation from the professor or from the teacher. As in my case, I deal with a lot of matters to prepare my students and to prepare myself for this court activity. So first, I would set the tone, which is to tell the students, what are the international environmental law principles and discuss the cases with them. And then provide them with example problems or moot problems that have been settled through these cases as well. And then as a professor, as a teacher, I would also identify what kind of moot problem that I want them to deal with. So it may be on domestic concerns, like for instance, at one time, I wanted them to moot on the new Centennial water source or the Kaliwa Dam project, and have them moot on the issues around this problem or around this issue representing affected indigenous peoples and local communities, and on the other hand, also representing on the other side the DNR and the government agencies concerned. And then we also after that we organized ourselves or the students into teams so that they can work together. So it allows them to actually discuss and allows them to collaborate with each other and work on the moot problem. I do assign the moot problem at least 2 to 3 weeks before the activity. And so to promote and to ensure that they are able to conduct their research and submit their written memorials before the activity itself. However, I do provide the guidance throughout the entire process. And so so it's really important that as a professor, as a teacher, you're always there to be open to questions if they have certain questions and issues with regard to the moot problem or moot exercise that they have. And finally, as part of my preparation, I'd also identify the moot judges or who will be playing the role of judges. And usually I would invite alumni or graduates of the School of Law who are already lawyers, as well as who had experience in the mooting competitions that we joined in the law school. So overall, as a reaction from my students, they really do enjoy the moot court exercise. This is actually provides them an opportunity to work on complex issues and participate in a work that is sometimes they feel as if they're contributing towards solving big or world issues or environmental issues or problems. So it's really also an opportunity for them to practice their oral argumentation skills, because they will be drilled by the moot court judges that I invite during the activity itself. So in terms of the other activities, of course, the UC also has a moot court team which has joined some of the most prestigious and popular mooting competitions in the country. But aside from that, we also, aside from the traditional law school competition for mooting, we have been invited to also, um, along with other law schools, selected law schools in the world, to participate in the ongoing OPOSA Intergenerational Moot Court, which is a collaborative, transparent, and real-world workshop to share the students' expertise in addressing actual pressing issues before a panel of international environmental law experts. So I've had my students participate since 2016 in that international or intergenerational moot court during the World Conservation Congress in Hawaii. In 2017, the second moot was held in University of Cebu, and the third one was held in France. So it's an ongoing, and the moot problem really for this World Moot Court revolved around the question of what are the rights of present and future generations under international law in relation to the protection of natural resources potentially threatened by the global climate crisis. So as a fairly young law school, University of Cebu, through its participation in moot court competitions, as well as this non-traditional moot court competition or moot court exercises, we call it, or workshops, we have really been able to allow our students to participate and form their expertise in terms of international environmental law. And it's really valuable because it allows them to give the confidence when they become eventually lawyers, and also enable them to be more interested in environmental law as a field of practice later on. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Attorney Lisa, for sharing your experience in the moot court competition as a way of a teaching strategy to enhance the pedagogical aspect of teaching environmental subjects. So we move on to our next resource speaker for today. We have Attorney Ernesto Neri. Attorney Neri.
Maayong buntag sa tanan. Good morning, everyone. My slides. Wait, give me a sec. Oops. So again, thank you for having us here. And before I begin, I would like to shout out to my colleagues from the XU College of Law, who's also in the Zoom session, who are also environmental law teachers. We have Judge Michaela Capatosha and Attorney Normie Batula. Maayong buntag sa inyo. So my short sharing, hopefully within 10 minutes, will be in 4 parts. I'll be sharing a context, the list of activities, learning outcomes, and the lessons that we can derive from our experience. So let us begin in the first point. Trigger warning because of these images. On the night of December 16, 2011, Tropical Storm Washi, or we call it Sendong, changed CDO forever. Sendong was just a tropical storm, but the data showed that it brought 10 hours of torrential rain, particularly over the uplands of Bukidnon, and which ultimately triggered this massive flash flood downstream that killed more than 1,200 people, including Iligan and other nearby municipalities. This intensity is very rare. I think some reports shared that this never happened before in the history of CDO. And it is considered the world's deadliest storm in that year. So I'm sharing this flashback because our environmental law engagement has been heavily informed by our Sendong experience. Now, in the aftermath, the government and civil society converged to analyze the causes of the disaster, and many were pointed out that the usual suspects, climate change in general, lack of an early warning system, there's even because of the rapid urbanization of the area. But among these causes, it was readily apparent that one major contributor to this disaster is the deforestation of the upland ecosystem, rooted in this kanya-kanya approach in local environmental management. So the assessment also saw that the ecological destruction upland has a direct impact in the ecology downstream. and ultimately to the Makahalar Bay area, which is shared by many municipalities. So XU, Xavier University, saw this as an urgent call to action to help bridge the gaps to ensure that Sendong will never happen again. So the law school in particular, through the center, saw this as an opportunity to position itself not just a producer of competent lawyers, no, but one that forms institution builders, and in particular, strengthening the institutions needed to ensure sustainability and regeneration of our ecosystem. So as action points, we focus our engagement on two existing institutions, namely the River Basin Management Council and the Makahalar Bay Development Alliance, all within the rubric of what we call the 3 Rs, or the Ridge, River, Reef approach. So now let's proceed to the heart of the discussion. So how did we manifest this in terms of class activities? I'll divide my sharing into 3 parts. No, the one facilitated by the center through the SUKLA interns. The next one is integrated in the class structure, and then the third is our prospective engagement in the coming semester. So as interns, what are the activities that we deploy them to? No, for example, we require them to help develop the implementing rules and regulations of the Makahalar Bay Development Alliance. So in a sense, this strengthens the internal mechanisms of the MBDA. We also provided rights literacy sessions for fisher folks associations across the Bay Area, particularly talking about the fisheries code. Another unique, and I think I could also resonate with the first speaker earlier, is that we also integrate immersion in the internship program. So it's a 3 to 4 days experience where they actually live with the communities upland in Cagayan de Oro City, where they have personal experience with small-scale mining and actually build relationships with the communities upstream. This also provides them a specific perspective in what the families are dealing with, those who manage the small-scale mining. And our latest engagement is a sort of helps one of our Congress persons here in Cagayan de Oro City craft the Makahalar Bay Development Authority statute. So our task there was to help compare existing laws that are the development authorities existing in the Philippines. So it's already filed, but it's not yet a law. Now, in terms of the activities integrated in the classes, I would first want to introduce a Laudato Si conference simulation. So it's not a moot court, but para siyang simulation of the Laudato Si, the papal encyclical on the environment, our common home. And it's a good framing to start because it pushes the students to simulate and see the position of various sectors in the society. They would role play as urban poor, government, scientists, and converse about the environment. The next one is we continue the rights literacy sessions with upland communities integrated in our CLEP, particularly talks with indigenous peoples, as we consider them as the frontline defenders of our environment. Another one activity is the drafting of the Payment of Ecosystem Services Ordinance. The Payment of Ecosystem is a new, I think fairly new concept, but basically it's essentially taxation where the LGU tax the citizens to fund their environmental services. So it's a fairly new concept, not yet gaining ground, but at least the students were able to develop ordinance templates. And then for the next 3 points, now this is an action research project, which is hindi naman formal research, but academic research, but it's more of students investigating what is happening on the ground. The CDO policy on flooding, the interaction between, the solid waste management ordinance and the newly implemented single plastic ban in our city, and the impact of face masks and face shields in relation to the solid waste management action plan, ordinance, research. So basically, these 3 action research seeks to allow the students to see the interrelationships, the dynamics between the law and the reality. And the prospective activities, we plan to fully integrate the Ridge to Reef in our CLEP, focusing mainly on environmental policy development. So as you can see, and rights awareness and capacity building. So if you can see, hindi kami nag-focus on direct legal assistance because of our limitations as well. Now to my last two slides, what are the skills and values that we've gained here? I think the first one is it allows the students to see that there is a world beyond the law. Like the law is just one tool of many tools that would be used to create a better ecosystem for our communities. It's also important that they're forced to communicate the law in Bisaya. It tries to democratize access to the legal knowledge through these popular education sessions. It also allows the students to see the importance of coalition building. So it's a skill, a negotiation skill. It's also strategic thinking skill where students see the importance of coalitions. Also technical, they they know how to draft ordinances and contracts. And then I think important is the sense of the sensing and proximity, the immersions, the community, the relationship with the community, develop this sense of empathy and proximity to the issues, which actually informs them not just in their study of the law, but ultimately their career paths in the future. And lastly, the lessons learned, community context matters. So as you've seen, our engagement was primarily driven by our Sendong experience 10 years ago. We never really reinvented the wheel because we just scanned the existing institutions and the gaps therein, and we saw that the law school can contribute to bridge those gaps. And then we have to define the learning outcomes with our students. And very important, I think, is aside from them learning the law, the technical aspect of the law, we have to provide a space for them to reflect what are the values and insights that they've gained because of these engagements. And the emphasis on these skills is also a sort of commitment to produce socially conscious, practice-ready lawyers who comfortably adopt interdisciplinary strategies in approaching legal and environmental challenges. So thank you so much and good morning to everyone.
Thank you, Attorney Neri, for sharing the approaches of your university. We have few comments in the chat box saying that those are very good ideas for our experiential learning to our students. And Attorney Commissioner Jojo also commented that she actually loves the action research. So it's very timely and relevant. So let's move on to our third resource speaker for today. We have the National President of the Association of Law Students of the Philippines, Mr. Kenny Bayudan.
Hello, good morning to everyone. Good morning to all professors who are here, to Com Jojo, to Com Domondon, and all other guests in this webinar. So for today, let me share to you some of my observations as a student, and also some of the things that we have done in the Association of Law Students of the Philippines to augment or at least to supplement the experiences or the classroom experience of students in regards to environmental law. Personally, my advocacy for the environment started when I participated in the Youth Future Conference of the Youth Future Project in Bonn, Germany in 2013. In this time, young people who are based in Europe gathered to discuss the most urgent environmental topics and sustainability with laureates from the Right Livelihood Award, speakers from the German Environmental Foundation, and other renowned environmentalists. During that event, I was able to learn that the discussion on the environment is not really just about illegal logging, denuded forests, the kaingins that are happening in our countryside because of as a means of farming, but there are bigger topics like the contribution of big companies, big oil companies in climate change, and also on that regard on the nuclear aspect, or the discussion on renewable energies. That time it dawned upon me that perhaps there is really more to this environmental advocacy that we haven't explored that much in the Philippines. Just a bit of a disclaimer. I am not one of those who are really active in the environmental advocacy sphere. but the environmental but this environmental advocacy has always been a part of my work, and whenever I have the chance to integrate it in my current work, that I do. So say for example, in my current work as an education program coordinator in one of the NGOs, we make sure that the platforms that we have for children and youth are we set aside a particular venue for them to discuss climate action, especially that most of the things that we do in the environmental advocacy are being led by at least the ones that I am exposed to are being led by young people. And these things, these discussions on the legal aspect or on the bigger battles of environmental advocacy, it's something that we also have to introduce to our young children. Now, as regards my experience as a law student, there are three things that I have observed uh, on how environmental law is being taught in law school. First, at least here in the metro, in the two schools that I have been with, the teaching of environmental law is highly traditional or conventional approach. Uses highly conventional or traditional approach. When I say traditional or conventional approach, it merely revolves on discussions, on lectures, on students reporting on the various statutes and also cases that are assigned to us. Second, it is heavily focused on teaching of the legal on the teaching of the legal principles, then how these principles can be used in actual legal problems. Uh, I think everyone knows that when you study a particular subject in law school, apart from dealing the concepts that are being discussed in the book, we are given with cases and we try to understand how the legal principles of these that are used or utilized in these cases. So on that regard, the experience actually hasn't gone yet beyond the usual way of learning a particular subject. And third, lessons are mostly concerned on what was, then what is, and what will be. There have been, I mean, outside law school, there are a lot of discussions and platforms that are being given to students already in order to discuss further how, their role in advancing the environmental advocacy and also to be more aware of the issues that are that surround the environmental advocacy. However, in the classroom setup, we are mostly concerned with looking into what the cases are, how it's being how it was fought in the Supreme Court, and just us taking a laid back attitude in really looking at how we can become future environmental lawyers or more active environmental um, advocates. So in that regard, I have realized that the the current setup on how environmental law is being taught in many law schools, I think what Attorney Neri has presented earlier was an exception. I would like to echo the presentation of Ms. Georgina a while ago, and I would like to um, express four important pedagogical components that perhaps environmental law professors should consider. First is the teaching of environmental law must go beyond the basic lecture and the Socratic approach, which only emphasizes on the transmission of knowledge. Environmental law is for me, it's an alive subject. So we have to make the learning experience an alive experience as well. Learning the law and learning all these legal principles, anyone can do that. I mean, at least in my perspective, anyone can do that just by reading the cases and by reading the book. But going beyond these traditional approaches and actually immersing or letting the students immerse in this field of practice, interacting with practitioners and knowing their stories, and perhaps becoming mentees of these practitioners will actually liven up the experience of the study of environmental law. And I would like also to echo that perhaps it is about time that we put emphasis or more emphasis on experiential learning. Um, uh, the the one shared by Attorney Neri earlier is actually a good mix, or I would say it's a very good practice for students to be more aware in terms of not just what the law is but how it's being applied. As a teacher myself, just also a disclosure to everyone, I'm actually also a teacher, and I've been studying education for quite some time already. uh, the the experience, or changing our methods into a more transformative approach, can create that long lasting impact to our students. It's something that we don't just keep in our memories as one of the principles or one of the concepts that we've learned in law school, but actually something that we could use in our personal advocacy. So, for example, I got a chance to be part of the ad hoc committee of my agency, of the NGO that I am working with, in developing the disaster risk reduction and management program for the agency. And actually, the things that I have learned in my environmental law subject was applied in that, because I get to see how my agency should act, should work upon, or should be able to um, address issues concerning disaster risk reduction and management in relation to what the law is actually saying. And lastly, perhaps the most important one is creative assessments. One thing that I really miss in my, or something that I am truly looking forward in my law subjects, and especially in if I have an opportunity to get an elective in environmental law, is to actually be assessed in ways other than the typical pen and paper test. I understand that one of the things that we are looking forward is the ability of the student to be able to answer bar questions. But assessment is so much more than just a pen and paper. To be able to actually know whether your student or students are anchored or in touch, or should I say, have a full grasp, or at least a better grasp of environmental law, perhaps changing the way we assess the students could help in giving them that kind of experience that is not just going to be settling on what the bar or the bar examination is setting for us. Now, for the last part of my for my discussion, I have two reflections that I would like to share to everyone. First is that many law students are already exposed to various environmental advocacies. Say, for example, I myself, I have been attending a lot of sustainable development goals discussions, and one thing that isn't being forgotten is the discussion on climate action. And most of the SDG seminars, webinars, symposiums, workshops, and trainings center around these discussions on climate action. And I think in law school, it would be a great opportunity for teachers to get to know more about the environmental advocacies of their students and use it um, as a basis on how they will craft their syllabus and how they will craft the learning experiences over the semester. I believe that teachers should bank on these experiences so that the study of environmental law gains more appeal to the law students, and not just going to be treated as a mere subject to be studied. Some law schools actually have co-curricular organizations for environmental advocates and enthusiasts. And partnerships with these organizations can actually enrich the classroom experience of environmental law students for the set of activities that are going to be done over the semester, or at least over the entire year, have been planned out by these organizations already. I think it would be a good opportunity for law professors and for these co-curricular organizations to meet up, to discuss, and perhaps find ways on how to integrate their activities in the classroom. Because I remember when Commissioner Jojo discussed the continuing legal education program last year in ALSP's National Convention, the CLEP is one aspect where students can actually pour their hearts and passion in areas or in fields of practice such as the environmental law. And by engaging other opportunities within the law school, or at least at the university in general, could provide more experiences and at least perhaps again to give a live or a lived experience for them in their study of environmental law. Second reflection is perhaps it would also be a great opportunity for the syllabus to target specific environmental issues, but of course still cover the most important legal aspects to be taught, because at the end of the day we are law students and our main concern is to study about the law. For example, in the recently conducted International Environmental Summit of ALSP in partnership with the Asian Research Institute for Environmental Law, where Sir Matthew Baird is heading, is the head, we provided actually a platform to discuss with law students the environmental status quo, accessible environmental justice, sustainable environmental policy, and economic development and environmental law. So these particular topics, these are usually not discussed in the classroom, but it's one way to extend the discussion from it's actually one way to extend these discussions. And in that summit, we also provided several platforms to discuss specialized topics on sustainable transportation, plastic pollution, marine conservation, and renewable energy. For me, it's actually a good idea to study the cases. It's good for a law student to be familiarized with the legal principles that were used in fighting particular issues and cases in the Supreme Court, in the trial courts. But our environmental issues are not just boxed in those particular topics. Most of the things that we've discussed has something to do with intergenerational, the one in Oposa versus Factoran, and also those cases involving Laguna Bay and solid waste management of certain cities like in Caloocan City and in Cebu. But the thing is, the issues on the environmental issues have already gone past that, and there are new topics that we have to be discussing already. And perhaps the last thing that I would like to say is that the study and practice of environmental law may not be as lucrative as other fields of law, but it's a viable it's a viable field of practice, especially those who have already started their journey in environmental advocacy. Thank you very much, and that's it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Bayudan, for the very informative sharing of your experience as a law student. So we will now move on to the open forum. You may direct your questions or comments to our specific resource speaker by posting it in our chat box or raising your hand. So let us all welcome Matthew, who will be our moderator for today.
Thank you very much, Attorney Mary. And so we already have Deli Molino. Did you want to please make a comment?
Hi, good morning. So I would like to make comments on the three sharers. First, with respect to the director, because I was former vice president for external affairs of Batangas State University, and my role then was to promote transnational education. So I think it is very important for us, if we're working in a university, to make sure that we will establish linkages so that we can promote more international exposure to our students. So that is a comment on the part of the administration. For the professor, I am also a professor. I'm a visiting professor at the International Training Center of ILO, where I actually handle sustainable public procurement. So this is actually an international program for students. And since I was an adjunct professor, my thought at the time was, how can I make this program available to students in the Philippines? So in that case, I negotiated with the organizers of the program to provide scholarship with our students, meaning that if we are professors, we have so much networks, and make sure that we will not be forgetting our students from the countries where we came from. So in that case, last August, I was able to negotiate one scholarship for a student at the Lyceum of Cavite. So that particular student was able to participate in a global summer program where we discuss about sustainable development agenda. And also another professor was given an opportunity to become an observer. So we will be promoting the program in the Philippines in the future. And then as a student myself, because I'm currently still finishing my PhD in law at the University of Turin. So I would like to encourage students, there are so many opportunities for you to engage in international forum. In my case, I make sure that in all of the platforms where there are free online courses, I was actually navigating already the courses. Imagine when I was in my first year of law, in PhD law, I took as many courses in EDX. Even if they were not required, I have to make sure that I capacitated myself in the field that I am interested in. And then, of course, I took advantage of the platform of being a student to participate in all essay writing contests, meaning that I have this particular objective of bringing the issues in my country, the Philippines, in international discussion on environmental law. So I participated in essay writing contests, and luckily in 2019, I won gold prize in the climate law essay writing contest, which is actually a side event on COP. So I would like to encourage students, there are so many platforms where you can actually engage and make sure that you will be bringing the issues in your country in the international agenda. So those are my 3 comments on how we can actually encourage more students to be involved in environmental practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, if I can echo that and also comment on Kenny's point about the work that the Asian Research Institute for Environmental Law and Asian Development Bank, the Environmental Law Champions Program, with the Asian Law Student Association on this environmental law summit. And there was about, I think, 1,000 people, students and young practitioners, and it lasted about a month. And there were various workshops and opportunities for sharing of ideas. But it wasn't just, the students were not just sort of the optional extra. It was an integral component and an integral event and conference where students were engaged. So I think that's also, a key message is that these days expectations, I think, of students are much higher, perhaps. And so there is that need for genuine engagement, which then can attract real participation. In terms of, there was a question, I think, asked to Rosalisa about mooting in terms of the years of the students, of what years your students were.
Yeah, so the students that that usually take up environmental law would be second-year students. So these are the students, basically, they haven't also taken up public international law yet, because I think we have our PIL taught in our third-year law level. And so it's also a way of introducing them to international law principles, so that it's important that at the start I provide them with the basics, the fundamentals first about international law, how to read the cases, especially international environmental law cases, and also learn about the key international environmental law principles, usually that are found in the Rio Declaration and the Stockholm Declaration. So we go through all these principles, and then how these principles are applied and discussed in these cases. And then I give them the moot problem. Just in addition to what you said about the ALSP activity that you had, Matthew, I think we were able to participate in the oceans track together with my colleagues. And I remember we also, aside from providing them with a brief lecture in one session, we also assigned them to work together on a modified debate moot activity. And so we assign a problem to them, which they worked together, collaborated with each other, and presented in the next meeting, the next session that we had with them. I think the representative from ALSB can remember that if he was part of the ocean track. But yeah, it's possible, although there were all virtually online activities with ALSP during the course of the summer sessions that we had. It was quite successful as well, together with the different organizers like you, the ALSP officers. So thank you.
And I wonder, President Kenny, in terms of the comment that you also made, I mean, obviously students have two focuses. You know, they might have a passion, but they also have to focus on passing their subjects and the bar. I'm interested in whether, you know, law students who want to go to the bar, whether having environmental law as part of the bar course might be some form of incentive, or do you think people who are passionate about environmental law are going to maintain their passion irrespective of whether it's a component of the bar exams?
I think irrespective of their whatever they're going to practice later on as a lawyer, I think the environmental advocacy will transcend will transcend to whatever they're going to do later on, because I know some friends who are still in law school, while their passion is not exactly on environmental law, but their works, their their out of law school activities are still concentrated on that aspect of their environmental advocacy.
Thank you. And I was just wondering.
May I add,
Sure.
Matthew? So, I do notice that there are students who initially their passion is not really environmental law, but going through the activities with them, and of course, if they join the mooting team where we join with court competitions, they go on, you know, several competitions with me. I was able to actually reap the benefits out of it, because now some of my former law students are now the ones, you know, who had taken over the Philippine Earth Justice Center, which, you know, as young lawyers, they're now very actively training other green legal clinics in the country with the help of Client Earth. And so it's really important that you plant the seed quite early in their career, right, Kenny? And then as law students, you plant the seed, and then you may reap the benefits later on. And so you can actually mold future environmental law champions as you do it.
Yes, I agree, Attorney Attorney Liza. And also, just a bit of an additional comment on that. There in the chat, there is also a comment that perhaps students should also have taken public international law. For me, I think it's also a great idea that students be provided with a live experience in PIL, especially when it comes to environmental topics or environmental issues. Because in the Philippines, it might not be as popular as other fields of practice like corporate law, but in the international arena, a lot of organizations are pushing advocating for a stricter and a more rigid and robust implementation of the law when it comes to international international environmental issues. And just one last thing to share is that in the Asian Law Students Association, where the ALSP is a member, one of the flagship projects, or at least I would say as a highlight project, is on environmental issues. So last April, there was this virtual conference where various students from all over Southeast Asia discussed on clean water issues. So it's something that perhaps in our law schools that we could also create a platform as regards on that. Yeah.
And Attorney Ernesto, I was also wanting to just sort of bring you in as well to just ask, in terms of the projects that you were doing, including sort of writing regulations for the local government unit, did you think that students needed sort of that early knowledge, or were they often able to work on those projects, and they would if they got interested, they'd do a little bit more research or ask the questions if they weren't quite sure, you know, like how to pass a local regulation or the constitutional arrangements between the national government and local governments?
Right. I think the raw subject, the basis for their knowledge is the StatCon. That's the basic raw material for them to work on the IRR and the ordinance. And We also make sure that there's a mentorship relationship, particularly in our internship program. The students do have access to law professors to check on their output, and that helps. And I think if they feel that they're more interested on policy development, we are offering opportunities in the center where they can deepen their experience on policy drafting. Aside from the environment, we are also engaged on gender, policy development, access to justice, policies in the barangay level.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And just to sort of share a little experience from my perspective, though I don't necessarily recommend it for all students. When I was finishing my arts degree and moving on to my law degree at the University of Sydney, this was in 1987, 88, I actually stood and was elected to my local government authority. So when I was at law school in fourth year, I went to the dean, the late Professor James Crawford, to ask for special permission to do environmental and planning law. And he asked me why I would want to do a final year subject in fourth year. And I said, well, because I'm voting on these matters in my local government unit, and I thought I should have some ideas what I was doing. He thought that was a very good excuse. So I was able to do environmental law in 1988, which included planning law, and I haven't looked back. But I don't necessarily recommend, if you're 21, to get elected to local government, although it's also an exciting thing to do. Can I thank very much our presenters and speakers for the panel and for their great commitment to environmental law. And I'll hand back now to Mary.
Thank you, Matthew. So I guess that wraps up the open forum for the sharing with our participants and our resource speaker for today. So before we end our lecture for today, we would like to, we will now be awarding the virtual certificates to our resource speaker. The Legal Education Board present the Certificate of Appreciation to Attorney Rose Lisa Isma Osorio, Chairperson of the Governing Board of the IUCN Academy of Environmental Law, for sharing her time, knowledge, and expertise as resource speaker during the Environmental Law Teachers Online Training Program 6th Session Pedagogical Enrichment on Environmental Law, held via Zoom virtual conference and given in the 3rd day of November this year of our Lord, signed by our chairperson, Ana Marie Melanie B. Trinidad. Thank you, Attorney Lisa, for sharing your time with us today. So the Legal Education Board would also like to award the Certificate of Appreciation to Attorney Ernesto B. Neri, Director of Center for Legal Assistance, Xavier University, Ateneo de Cagayan College of Law, for sharing his time, knowledge, and expertise as resource speaker during the Environmental Law Teachers Online Training Program 6th Session Pedagogical Enrichment on Environmental Law, held via Zoom virtual conference and given on the 3rd day of November of the year 2021 and signed by Chairperson Ana Marie Melanie B. Trinidad. Thank you also Attorney Neri for gracing us with your presence and for sharing your valuable insights on experiential learning based on your school practices. So let's move on to awarding of certificate. The Legal Education Board also award the Certificate of Appreciation to Kenny J. Bayuden, National President of the Association of Law Students of the Philippines, for sharing his time, knowledge, and expertise as resource speaker during the Environmental Law Teachers Online Training Program 6th Session Pedagogical Enrichment on Environmental Law, held via Zoom virtual conference and given on the 3rd day of November of the year of our Lord 2021, signed by Chairperson Ana Marie Melanie B. Trinidad. Congratulations, everyone, and thank you again for joining us in our training program. So before we end today's session, we would like to request everyone to open their video camera for a quick photo session. Our colleagues from ADB will taking the pictures. So maybe we can put up some smile. All right, I can see some pretty and very handsome faces in my screen. So Angela and Gladys, would you like to take the pictures?
Okay, we'll do on 3. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, I'll just scroll through 4 more screens. 1, 2, and 3. and 3. Last one, 1, 2, and 3. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Angela. So we thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. I'm very happy that we are around 90 for today's session. So please don't forget the registration form for your attendance, as well as the evaluation form. Again, we would like to invite everyone to join us for an interview and share your comments, insights, or experience in this training program. The links for the interview form is in the chat box, and you may also join us in our Facebook page and via Law Asia to establish linkage with your co-participants and members of the group. For the Zoom links to our next session, November 10, please check your inbox as well as your spam, and we will send the links this weekend. And we remind everyone that we will only be requiring compliance to at least 8 of the training session for the issuance of your certificate. So I hope everyone have a lovely day and you enjoy our session for today. So thank you and goodbye.